Let's go ahead and open our meeting, our NBU budget workshop, June 2nd, 2021 at 1 p.m. I'm going to go ahead and read the opening script, and then I'll have Laura take roll. Governor Abbott has temporarily suspended certain requirements of the Open Meetings Act in response to the COVID-19 public health disaster. Specifically, governmental entities are permitted to meet by telephone or video conference, provided the meetings are audible to members of the public and allow for two-way communication. The suspension of certain requirements of the Open Meetings Act is intended to reduce in-person meetings and the spread of COVID-19 while maintaining government transparency. Today, the NBU Board of Trustees meeting will be held by video conference. The board welcomes and encourages the public to participate during the public comment period. Members of the public will be allowed to participate during the public comment period as to raise any matters related to NBU that is not on the agenda, as well as discuss any item on the agenda. We ask that all participants state their name and address and limit their comments to no more than 5 minutes. Due to the electronic limitations of this meeting, citizens will only be allowed to make comments during the public comment period of the meeting. For items not posted on the agenda, the NBU Board of Trustees may not deliberate on any item that is raised by a citizen that is not posted on the agenda. For such an item, NBU may 1, make a statement of fact regarding the item, 2, make a statement concerning the policy regarding the item, or 3, propose that the item be placed on a future agenda. A recording of the video conference will be made available to the public on NBU's website after the meeting. Okay, Laura, if you please take roll.
Mr. Harrell?
Yes, ma'am, present.
Ms. Hoffman?
Here.
Mayor Brockman?
Here.
Mr. Gray?
Here.
Mr. Peters?
Here.
Mr. Taylor?
Here.
Mr. Kelso?
Here.
Ms. Locke?
Here.
Ms. Schriever?
Present.
Ms. Britton? Ms. Krause?
She's present. She's just having trouble getting in right now, but she's here. She just came to my office.
Got it. Mr. Hubbard?
Here.
And Ms. Rivers here. The quorum is present.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura. Okay, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance and invocation led by Board Vice President Judith Dykes Hoffman.
I didn't realize I had that, but here we go. If you'll follow along with me or join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to the Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. If you'll join me in prayer or in the manner with which you are most comfortable for a moment to give thanks. Father in heaven, we thank you for the blessings of the rain, as well as the many blessings that we have in this beautiful town that we live in. Especially this past weekend, honoring those veterans and this Memorial Day and the work that they do and have done to give us the freedoms that we so enjoy. I ask that you be with us today as we deliberate the business of NBU, and then to be with us as always as we go about our business and protect us and keep us safe until we come together again. In your name we pray. Amen.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Okay, public comment. Not hearing any, we will move to items from the chair. Number 1, report from Budget Committee. Ms. Hoffman's got that one.
Let me pull up the report on that. Yes, the Budget Committee, we met just recently on May 27th for a couple of hours starting at 9:30. Those present were myself along with Board President John Harrell, as well as Ian Taylor, Dawn Schriever, Ryan Kelso, Connie Locke, Melissa Krause, Robin Britton, David Hubbard, Kimberly Huffman, John Warren, Laura Rivers, Rocio Gallegos, and Darla Arnold. The items that we discussed in that very productive meeting was the strategic plan and timeline, the fiscal year 2022 budget and financial operating plan, including assumptions used for the budget process, capital projects, and the revenue requirements and debt funding needed to fund projects. Ian Taylor briefly discussed his 5 key takeaways and emphasis on continued growth in the area that drives the budget. Committee members were pleased with the level of detail and thoroughness of the information presented on the budget that guides their decision-making and recommendation process. And that is my report.
Okay, thank you. Okay, items from staff. Number 1, CEO's update.
I have no update today, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it takes us to the moment we've all been waiting for, right? Presentation items. Number 1, presentation and discussion of draft fiscal year 2022 budget and 5-year plan. I will turn it over to Mr. Taylor.
I do have something to talk about here.
Yep.
And Dr. Hoffman just went through some of the highlights of it. The presentation that you'll see is similar to years past, so it's not to disorient you. We just want to make sure that it's easy to understand and the content is clear to you. Please stop us at any time if you have any questions. This is one of the most important meetings we have each year. As Dr. Hoffman pointed out, the presentation is about 2 hours, so what it took last time. And anyway, we'll kick it off here. There's 5 key takeaways. So as we near the end of preparing for this year's or next year's budget and the 5-year financial operating plan, I was kind of thinking about the key ideas and themes of what it all means, and 5 takeaways came to mind. So before we get into the content of the presentation, I'd like to run through these 5 items just kind of as context for understanding what you're about to see and hear. And the first one is, where it matters, we're doing very well. If you look at our customer satisfaction surveys, each year we ask, what do you want us to do for you? And it's be reliable and be affordable. If you look at utilities across the country, it's reliability and affordability that matters. We're there, and it has taken a lot of work to get to there and to maintain both of those. And we're doing very well as relates to those 2 items. The second is that growth continues to drive our budget. 80% of our budget, again, this year is going to be for capital. And of that capital, 70% is going to water and wastewater. And so we're still in that period of growth where we're needing to construct to keep up with the demand. Going into the third one, we continue to strengthen our lines of business. On the electric side, our electric reliability is absolutely best in class. I talked to a customer from a neighboring utility just yesterday, and he said that he was out of power for 24 hours because of the storms that we had last week. That's just incredible. We didn't have anywhere near that, and you'll see it in the reliability numbers that'll come out here in a moment. Our electric affordability is still very good. It's very competitive. As you know, we're a bit above average right now until we recover from the effects of Winter Storm Uri. But we also expect our peers to be increasing, some of our peers to be increasing their rates as well to make up for those types of issues. On the water and wastewater side, we continue to execute our capital plans to keep us reliable and on the path to compliance. You're going to see that here in a moment. We've made significant investments in the last 4 years, and we started putting some breathing room into our systems. Once we're back into compliance, we're going to have a few more years of capacity additions to keep us in compliance, but the end is in sight. For water supply, we have one of the lowest portfolio costs in the region. We have the lowest retail rate for essential use water. In fact, our essential use bill is 25% lower than the next highest bill on the corridor between and including Austin and San Antonio. And it's half the cost of the average bill, so very affordable on water. When you look at support services, on the technology side, we're making historical investments. We're essentially overhauling our technology systems to prevent against attack and failure, and we're making investments in efficiencies. For our new headquarters that we're designing, that's progressing very well. We had an opportunity to tour the cave last week. That was very interesting. And the options that we're evaluating for an access road to the loop are going very well. And I hope to have some options for you along with some pricing at our August regular board meeting. And then finally, on the lines of business, big data is really coming into focus here at NBU, and it's going to change how we manage the business. It's going to allow us to make decisions based on data instead of solely on instinct or personal bias. And that's going to help us to establish better levels of service and therefore understand where the investments need to be made. The fourth item here is personnel. Our personnel are still strained, but the situation is improving. We're not there yet, but we have grown the workforce by 40% in 5 years, which tells you just how understaffed we were. We're still struggling with staffing shortages in key areas. And the outcome of that type of shortage, there's a couple of things. Number one, outward facing, it can come across as poor service. We're not meeting the expectations that people have of us. On the inside, it's an engagement issue. While our engagement scores are high, we've had 4 years of employees telling us about workload, and it's something that we continue to add. We've added about 12 people per year recently, because we agreed a few years ago we could add 50 in 1 year and still need more, but we know our rates can't handle it, and it'd be even difficult for our human resources and other groups to absorb that many employees in 1 year. When I look at this year's 5-year plan, that flurry of adding employees is about to come to an end. I feel like we're getting to the point where we've got folks in key positions, and we're going to be a bit more nuanced at how we add them. So over the next several months through the fall, we're going to be putting together key performance indicators for across the business. It's what that type of activity is what a mature organization would do anyway. As it relates to personnel, it will inform where we need people and how many in the future based on whether we're meeting those levels of service that we'll bring to you for your review and approval. And in the absence of that, it's really coming down to each manager's opinion about where we need people. And so far, they've all been right. So these KPIs, they're going to help us going forward. And then finally, rates. We are in year 2 of a 3-year rate plan. And next year, we will pursue the next plan. We have cost of service studies for all 3 lines of business in this next fiscal year, which is going to be an important foundation for the next look at our rates. And my question to the team going into this budget cycle is, when will the rate increases end? And where's the light at the end of that tunnel? And what you're going to see towards the end of this presentation is what the 20-year forecast looks like. And it shows that we're going to need a few more years of increases until our capital program reaches a steady state. But even with those increases, we believe we will have a very competitive bill. We'll still be very competitive. So my point is the end is in sight on rates, and it's something that I'm very excited about. Next slide, please. Okay, here's the overview. We're going to talk at the very beginning about the strategic plan, because at the end of the day, a budget is just a way of funding our strategy. We'll look at growth and other assumptions that went into building the budget and the FOP. We'll look at our capital, our O&M, and then what the revenue requirements are coming out of that. Then we'll look at the funding sources for those revenue requirements. Then we'll get into the 20-year financial forecast to close it out. Next, please. One more. Okay, strategic plan. So you all know that we decided to keep the current strategic plan that we have and go with it for 1 more year, just because of the workload on our employees, and we don't want to be shaking things up at this time. We want to keep things going as they are. So we're going to kick off the next phase of strategic planning, so that'll be effective in 2023. More to come on that. But as you know, this is how it works. It starts with the Board of Trustees. Next slide, please. And we of course look at our mission, our vision, our core values, and these guiding principles. When we first put together the strategic plan in 2017, or that revision of it in 2017, there were a whole bunch of strategic goals, and there were too many. But by golly, we sure liked the way they sounded, and we worked really hard on the words. So we turned those goals into guiding principles, and I think if we just follow these things, we can't help but do well. Anyway, there's a guiding principles. Next slide, please. Then we have our 6 strategic goals, and they come from our 6 key focus areas, as you can see on the left column. And for each one of those key focus areas, we have a goal that we've set, and then the last column is the measurement of that goal. And the next level of granularity below that, the next slide, please, is what we call our balanced scorecard. Because if we just take those 6 strategic goals, it doesn't provide a good enough view of the performance of the organization. So on the left, you see our key focus areas, which is the same as on the last slide. You see the tier 1 goal, same as on the last slide, but then we get into some more granularity. We pick a specific strategy to measure, and then a tactic attached to that strategy that we're going to measure. We have these strategies and tactics and measurements across the company, but we pick these right here as the ones that we believe would be most impactful. And then finally, the next slide. So here is the plan for the next strategic planning cycle. So starting in the winter, we'll start doing some surveying the board and employees and customers and do that internal data collection. Then in March, we'll start the strategic plan intro with the SWOT analysis, and then we'll compile those inputs for the strategic plan. And then in June of 2022, we'll bring that to the Board of Trustees for their work and consideration. Next slide, please. So growth and assumptions. So that's the strategic plan. That's what guides all of this. And anyway, the update is coming on that next year. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, growth and assumptions. And Dawn's got this one.
We're sharing the presentation. So, okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the assumptions that went into the plan. As you know, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, New Braunfels is experiencing high growth. So this plan incorporates a growth model that averages out to 5.56% growth rate for the combined lines of business across the 5 years. So each line of business went through their own models to come up with their growth rates by customer class. But when averaging out across the plan, it's 5.56% for all lines of business. In addition, we also had the winter storm. It played a big part in how we budgeted for fiscal year 22 and through the out years. You'll see the electric revenues reflect the recovery of funds to be collected from our customers for those extraordinary power costs that we experienced in February of 2021. Also, we'll be filling the power stabilization fund by the end of fiscal year 26 to 365 days of power costs. And in addition, we'll also pay off that $50 million taxable note in fiscal year 23. Another big assumption that's in this plan is it includes the GLO capital contributions and the water supply fees for the Mayfield development. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Ian.
All right, thanks, Dawn. So you've seen this slide before. The key takeaways about growth are there are three main things it's doing to NBU. It's consuming capacity in our infrastructure at twice the rate it normally had. It has strained our workforce, and with all the new folks that are coming to town, it's changed the expectations that our customers have of NBU. Those are the key things that we focus on. Next slide, please. So here is what the past growth looks like per line of business, and then the forecast going forward in the 5-year financial operating plan. As Dawn mentioned, 5.8% is what we've assumed for the next year for fiscal year 22. And across the 5 years, we're estimating the growth to be 5.56%. Next, please. One more. Okay, thanks. Okay, this is the 80-20 I was talking about. You know, before all this growth, it seems like it's getting further and further away all those years back when our budget was half O&M, half capital, but it's really settled into this 80% capital, 20% O&M in recent years, and it's going to continue that way for some period of time. So next slide. And this is how that capital, this 80% of our budget, this is how it breaks down between line of business. You can see that the biggest bars in fiscal year 22, the gray one, which is the biggest out of the entire thing, that's facilities. That's our support services. So that includes NBU HQ. And you're going to see those dollars in there for the next 2 years. And then second behind there is water, and then of course wastewater. So like I said earlier, water and wastewater are really driving this 5-year financial operating plan. Next, please. And from here, I'll turn it over to Ryan.
All right, thanks, Ian. Next slide. So in the last planning, in the last planning cycle, we adjusted our growth assumption down to half growth. And as Dawn said, we pivoted from that. Our expectation was that the pandemic would cause a decline in economic activity and growth in the region, but we've seen quite the opposite. And we've adjusted our plan accordingly. So NBU, we master plan all of our utility systems, so we're able to be agile and speed up or slow down as growth speeds up and slows down. But with all that said, the drivers for infrastructure improvements on the electric system may stay the same. First and foremost, we design and build our systems to meet regulatory compliance. And the second driver you see on the screen is proactive operations. We plan system improvements to ensure that we provide the expected level of service at the absolute lowest cost. And you see there in those bullets the goals that drive our planning efforts. We have a goal of SAIDI to stay in the top quartile of Texas utilities or maintain a SAIDI less than 52.56 minutes. SAIDI is essentially the average outage interruption, average interruption duration for our entire system for electric outages. And it's a really good indicator of electric system reliability and resilience. We also have safety goals. Safety is the average interruption frequency one may expect to have throughout any given year. So this safety goal of 1.1 interruptions mean that we target to limit interruptions per customer less than roughly 1.1 times a year. We shoot to keep customer counts per feeder below 1,000 customers. The old adage, don't keep all your eggs in one basket, rings true here. That helps you in the reliability realm. If you do drop a circuit, it's only roughly 1,000 customers instead of it being much greater than that. We should target to have our nominal capacity of our system greater than system demand. And finally, we rehab and replace our aging infrastructure prior to failure. Next slide. So here's a look at NBU's reliability and SAIDI. As I said on the previous slide, SAIDI is the average outage duration for each customer served. And with SAIDI, lower is better. So you can see here NBU represented with the blue bars on the chart. We consistently outperform other sectors, all other sectors of the industry. And this last calendar year, 2020, our SAIDI was 25.3 minutes, which is exceptionally low, roughly half of our goal. So we're doing quite well in that area. And our reliability is truly a product of our sound planning and sophisticated preventative maintenance programs that we have in place. Next slide. So this graph shows our electric system capacity. It's our goal, as I said, to maintain our system capacity greater than our system demand. The orange line represents our historical and forecasted system demand for electricity, and the blue line represents our actual system demand, or I'm sorry, our system capacity. I said that wrong. I always get that backwards. So each time that blue line moves up, we're adding a power transformer or a new substation in the system. And we design our substations so that we can easily expand them in the future. So it's not always a brand new substation that moves that blue line up. We're adding new transformers or upsizing existing transformers. And that's why you see that line trending upward. And like I said, our goal is to maintain nominal capacity greater than system demand. Next slide. This graph shows the number of electric distribution feeders in our system and the average customer counts of those feeders. So a distribution feeder, as y'all know, is the lines that carry the electricity from the substation to the distribution transformers, out in front of your house, those pad mounts or the transformers that are hanging on the pole in your front yard. Like I said, our goal is to keep our customer counts at or below 1,000 customers per feeder. And as you can see, the plan successfully accomplishes that. And to do that, one last note, we've got 15 new feeders planned in the next 5 years. So we're roughly adding 3 new feeders per year to accomplish that goal. So, all right, back up, there you go. So this graphic shows NBU's electric system territory. There are 12 substations represented by the red dots. Those are the existing substations. Planned transformer additions or replacements are represented by the yellow triangles, and the planned substation additions are represented by the blue dots. The electric capital plan calls for the addition of 1 new power transformer at EC Morningwig and the replacement of 4 power transformers, 2 aging units, and 2 capacity upgrades, and the construction of 2 new substations, Waco Springs in 2024 to serve load growth in the Barramundi area, and Kohlenberg substation in 2026 to serve load associated with the Mayfair development in the northeastern reach of our territory. Next slide. This slide shows significant projects in our 5-year electric capital plan. Some of the large items to note are the mini feeders. Like I said, we got 15 new feeders planned. That is significant. And the 5 power transformers that we have in the plan to replace or add to substations. And then of course the 2 substation additions are big ticket items as well. Next slide. So here's what the plan looks like. The majority of the plan is in place to support growth and development, with 19% of funds allocated to replacing aging infrastructure, and the remainder is split between contractual obligations and IT projects to total $113 million. Next slide. All right, we'll move on to water. So water system improvements share the same driver as electric system improvements. First and foremost, we design our systems to achieve regulatory compliance, which ensures the protection of public health. The second driver is centered around proactive operations. In this area, we actively address known aging infrastructures to reduce the risk of high consequence failures across the water system. Next slide. But currently, portions of NBU's water system is not in compliance with TCEQ regulations, with deficiencies specifically in elevated storage. Projects within the 5-year plan will address this issue, as you'll see on following slides. And NBU is currently working to implement a formal asset management program. NBU is currently drafting an asset management policy to guide the development of the program. And the vision of the program is NBU will develop and implement an asset management program that will guide the planning, development, operation, and maintenance of its assets in an effective and sustainable manner to continually provide excellent levels of service. It's a mouthful. And the mission of the program is to manage our assets in a way that ensures sound stewardship of the NBU resources while delivering services valued by customers, protecting the environment, and providing for the health and safety of the public and the workforce. With the recent Fiskals that we've experienced, that asset management program development has become even more important to the utility. And like I said, we're designing it to accomplish the goals that I just laid out in that mission and vision statement. Next slide. Okay, on the next 2 slides, you'll see a high-level overlook of capacity versus compliance. So this shot here was a slide that was in our slide deck last fiscal year whenever we came to you. As you can see, we were not in compliance with all 3 areas in our water system. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that we've made significant progress in compliance as it relates to distribution pumping and production. NBU submitted alternative capacity requirements to the TCEQ based on our actual production needs in the NBU system. This ACR for production was approved in September of 2020, so just after we came to y'all for the budget cycle last year, which brought us into compliance for production. And the recent completion of the water plant pump station expansion brought NBU into compliance for distribution pumping, and will accomplish compliance for elevated storage when Bretsky Phase 2 ground storage tank is completed. The project's currently under construction, and it'll be complete in the late 2021 timeframe. And even though it's a GST, it will service the downtown zone as an elevated storage tank. So a bit of confusion. You could find a bit of confusion there, but because it sits so high up in our system, it serves as elevated storage. Next slide. So on the next 2 slides, we've got some shots that show our water system progress. On the left there, you see our water plant expansion. As I said, this project brought us into compliance for distribution pumping. And the GB SUD interconnect on the right was a project put in place to manage peak demands, especially in the Morningside pressure zone. And it has proven very helpful in doing that through the summer peak periods. Next slide. There on the left, it's hard to miss when you're driving down the loop, the Barramundi elevated storage tank. That takes care of elevated storage needs in the loop zone up there in the Barramundi development area. And on the right, you've got the Grandview ground storage tank and pump station and wellford upgrade project picture there. You can see the Grandview tank was upsized to 1.3 million gallons, up from a capacity of, I believe it was 0.2 million gallons. So we'll add storage capacity there, which adds reliability to the system. The project's also going to upgrade capacity in well 4 and also the distribution pump station coming out of that Grandview tank. Next slide. All right, so a very familiar slide for y'all. This is a snapshot that was taken back in 2018 during our impact fee study. The red X's on the table on the slide indicate water pressure zones that were in non-compliance at that time. And the table also shows the projected elevated storage needs through 2028. And the column on the far right shows the specific projects that are planned to bring NBU into TCEQ compliance. And like I said previously, NBU will be in compliance for elevated storage whenever we complete the Breathview Phase 2 ground storage tank. And next slide. So again, per the 2018 impact fee study, here's a look at where we were for water distribution pumping. Like the previous slide, red X's indicate a need, and the recent completion of the water plant pump station expansion brought NBU into compliance for distribution pumping. And you can see there still is a need for there still is a projected need for additional distribution pumping across the system. And our current capital plan that we have put together addresses future non-compliance issues. As you can see in that 2028 column, there's a significant need across the system to maintain compliance. And that's why you see so many distribution pumping projects within the capital plan. Next slide. All right, so this slide really tells the story of just how tight things have been and continue to be in the water system. So the graph shows historical max day demands in light blue and projected max day demands in the dark blue bars. NBU's existing water system capacity, which is 34.2 MGD as the black dash line, and our planned water system capacity is represented by the red dash line, and the table of projects associated with each numbered step in that line is in the top left corner there. So as you can see, our planned system improvements will increase our water system capacity and allow for some contingency in the case of failure. And one thing to note here, you see that the blue bar in 2019 did exceed our existing maximum capacity. And what's modeled here or represented here in the historical coincidental max day demand and the projected coincidental max day demands are just that, coincidental peaks across the entire system. So what we do is we analyze each zone within our system. There are a dozen pressure zones in our system. And we look at what the max day for that year was in that zone. And max days may occur on different days throughout the year. So what we do is we take those different days and stack them up, and there's always that potential that there could be a coincidental max day. But some zones may peak on, let's just say, July 4th, and then July 5th, and July 6th, and are staggered. But sometimes they line up, like you see in 2018, when you have severe dry periods and create a really large peak. So you can see 2020, we didn't quite have as large a coincidental max day peak. But moving out into the future, you can see those projects representing our system capacity in the red dash line really build in a more comfortable contingency in the case we do have a pump failure or one of our production facilities goes down for any given reason. We can continue to service our customers. Next slide.
Hey, Ryan.
Yes, sir.
This is Wayne. On the previous two charts where you showed some out of compliance situations with TCEQ that don't get rectified until 2028, some 2030, Does TCEQ penalize us any? Or are they happy that we have plans in place? What's the situation regarding their feeling on our non-compliance?
Sorry, I muted myself. So Wayne, that's a good point there. As long as we have it in the plan, as we do today for our non-compliance matters with elevated storage, we're in continuous discussion with the TCEQ to get those projects done within the right time frame so that we both entities feel comfortable. They understand that the rate appetite can only handle so much around here. So we show them pretty much everything, our whole capital plan, where those projects fit within it, and why we're timing them in such a way to achieve compliance at the right time and not too far in advance. So they've been understanding to date, and they're well aware of our plans moving forward, and they're satisfied with them.
If I could add to
So
that,
effectively, they don't have any penalties that they apply to us as a result if they're happy with the plan.
Right, so they do have the option to assess fines or penalties for non-compliance. And that's why we pursued alternative capacity requirements for production, because we knew that we would not be able to achieve the 0.6 gallon per minute per connection production requirements within a reasonable time frame to satisfy TCEQ requirements. It's not a possibility. We can't physically build the projects fast enough. So we've proven that our system can perform with reliability at a lower standard, and they've accepted that through those alternative capacity requirements. And elevated storage, like I said, we've had discussions with them of timing of projects within our plan, and we continuously talk to the TCEQ to make sure that we don't fall under any kind of consent decree or have any fines associated with any non-compliance within our system with elevated storage or distribution pumping for that matter.
hey, Ryan, is it correct to say that, Ryan, is it correct to say that right now the only area where we're not in compliance is elevated storage? And once we get Bresky built and back into compliance, then we don't anticipate being out of compliance again if we continue to execute the capital plan as it is today. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So that's one of the points I was making early on, is that we're almost there. We're almost there, man. We're almost back into compliance completely. And once we get back into compliance, that's kind of the point I was making. It doesn't mean that everything stops. We still have things to build to make sure that, if you go to the next slide, please. One more. Yeah, we got to continue building so that we can get this type of contingency capacity built into our system. So while we're going to be back in, like, next year, you're going to see that compliance, non-compliance slide, and we're going to be all in compliance. And you might wonder, why are we still building the level of capital that we are? It's so we can stay ahead of it. And there's going to come a point, you'll see in the 20-year forecast, where that drops off and we get into a more steady state situation, even if the growth rate continues where it is right now.
And if I could make a note on the previous slide, maybe a point of clarification, Wayne, these requirements that you see in the 2028 column are based on our master planning criteria, which are above and beyond, slightly above TCEQ minimum compliance. So just because it says fiscal year 30, that is because we're building it just as needed per compliance standards, but we've triggered the project based on our master plan criteria slightly before, so that we don't find ourselves in that non-compliant state. And I'm sorry, I should have addressed that or brought that up before I ran down that rabbit trail, but that may help explain it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you very much.
All right, next slide. Next slide. Okay, so with this table, again, it's something that y'all are familiar with. We've presented on it before. We've gone through an effort, really granular in nature, down to the pressure zone to understand exactly what connections are truly available within the water system if we were to take a compliance-driven approach. And you can see there are a lot of red numbers on here. That means that we're overdrawn if we were to just take a hard line of compliance in allowing new connections. We need the impact fee revenue, so we've decided to take an approach that balances the risk of being out of compliance while still letting growth happen. We've got the plans in place to add capacity to our systems to get into compliance. And so if you advance the slide, what we've developed is a system where what you see there is our March 2021 available connections within the system. It's a very complex mathematical juggling of connections because of the way that our pressure zones are connected, and connections can be used in different zones and moved downstream. So these numbers don't necessarily exactly represent what's available in any given zone specifically because of that. So the downtown zones where everything starts, and so we can move those connections around. But the important takeaway here is that we've developed a process to responsibly manage the system now and into the future, so we don't find ourselves in any overdrawn state in the future. We'll see it coming, and it's a good tool to have for the water team. Next slide. All right, so here's the plan. With NBU so close to achieving regulatory compliance across the water system, we're now able to shift a larger portion of our current CIP to projected growth from new development. Now that's really in the same bucket of compliance. We're building to keep up with new growth to maintain compliance, but we've broken it out into a separate bucket. Compliance meaning that we're addressing existing out of compliance issues. You can see that a small portion of the CIP is in place to fulfill contractual obligations with either the city of New Braunfels or developments outside of our CCN. And finally, roughly $10.4 million is in the budget to support continued development of the ASR project. That's on there as drought management. And the $10.4 million will support continuous operation of the demonstration well that we've already drilled, continued coordination with the EAA, well monitoring, and then also future ASR wells. Next slide. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, NBU master plans all of its utility systems. The 2021 Water and Wastewater Master Plan update is currently underway and should be complete this fall, which will lay the groundwork for an impact fee study and update in 2022. The master plan describes all the capital improvements for both the water and sewer system that we propose out into the future all the way to 2045 for this plan. And we also master plan our water resources. So we complete a minor water resource plan update annually with a full plan update once every 5 years. This plan is to help identify the supply needs and future possible supply sources. So a minor update will be completed this fall with a full update scheduled for 2023. And we've really made a big effort to marry those two processes. We've got two different consulting engineers that perform each of those studies, but we've tied them at the hip. And so the inputs and assumptions that go into each plan are the same. And if we're contemplating new water resources, the master plan concurrently addresses the infrastructure needs to support and move those water resources. So previously the plans were conducted kind of in their own silos. They did acknowledge each other, but now we've got them really tied together so that we've got a full look of if we incorporate a new water supply, we ensure that we've got the right infrastructure to transmit that water across our system to service the future growth within our territory. Next slide. All right, home stretch here with wastewater. Next slide. So finally, our wastewater system improvements have the same drivers as electric and water. First and foremost, we design our infrastructure to meet regulatory compliance. And the second driver is centered around proactive operations for the same purposes as the water system. Next slide. So currently our wastewater system is not in regulatory compliance as it's deficient in both pipeline capacity and lift station capacities. What you'll see in the 5-year plan is a path to compliance in both these areas. And the enterprise asset management plan, as described earlier, is also going to be applied to our wastewater infrastructure. Next slide. So these charts y'all are all familiar with. They show our wastewater system capacity. So with wastewater, the TCEQ requires that you begin engineering design for plant expansion when you hit a threshold of 75% of plant flow or plant capacity. And you must begin construction when you hit 90%. So as you can see in the graph, we reached that trigger to begin design for the McKenzie treatment plant expansion in 2023 and construction in 2024. The construction of the 2.5 MGD McKenzie plant expansion is in our 5-year plan. Next slide. So the green treatment plant here is on this slide. You can see that our recently opened 2.5 MGD green wastewater treatment plant has added adequate capacity to the system to carry us out to years beyond our 5-year plan for design and construction. So that plant expansion is not in the 5-year plan. Next slide. All right, so here's a look at Kuehler. So the existing South Kuehler wastewater treatment plant was built in the 50s. The North Kuehler plant was constructed in the mid-80s, and many of their treatment components are nearing the end of their useful life. So we've budgeted for rehab of the critical treatment components for both of the plants. And as you can see in the graph, the rehab work will require us to take portions of the plant offline, which will reduce our treatment capacity. And as you can see, it's truly imperative that we get this work done in the next 5 years. Otherwise, we're going to lose the opportunity to do this rehab work until we expand the plant at capacity, at which point we can take treatment trains offline to perform the rehab work necessary. That plant expansion is not planned for a number of years. As you can see, it's not within this decade. Next slide. All right, so here's a couple shots of sewer system progress. And I forgot to give a shout out back in the water section, but our drone team internal to NBU captures these shots, many of the shots that you've seen here on the slide. So they do a wonderful job in capturing construction in progress. And so here are a couple neat shots of one, our green Interceptor and water reclamation facility relocation project. It is now complete as of this last September. On the right, you see our North Kuehler Interceptor project. It's one of the big bore pits. That little tiny machine down there is actually an excavator. And the bucket that you see holding or reach down in there, that small excavator is actually filling that bucket up to pull material out of that hole. So really, really heavy civil project. Next slide. Another familiar slide for you. Shows the alignment of the North Kuehler Interceptor. Y'all know where it goes. We've talked about this several times before. So all 3 segments are under construction right now, and they'll be complete by, and as of April 2021, they are 65% complete, and substantial completion for the project is scheduled for late 2021. And a small section of rehab work is slated to be done in early 2022. It's the pipe that runs underneath Schlitterbahn. We actually rerouted the sewer interceptor. The main interceptor now routes around Schlitterbahn, as you can see, north of the confluence of the rivers. It kind of juts up to Cross River, where it goes under the Guadalupe. So previously we had manholes in the middle of Schlitterbahn. It was a maintenance issue, and just not an ideal location for a sewer line. So we're keeping that one in service, but it's only going to service the Schlitterbahn sewer needs. Next slide. All right, so same with water. We have connection counts tracked down to the connection in each basin on the sewer side. So we got 4 basins here shown on the screen. As you can see, we're overdrawn in North Kuehler because of our pipeline capacity issues in that basin. But you can see after we complete the North Kuehler Interceptor project, the red number turns to black, which indicates that we're in compliance and we have capacity for future growth and development. We've taken the same risk-based approach as water. Even though we're out of compliance now, we have not stopped growth, but we do have the projects planned and in place in our plan to address those deficiencies. Next slide. All right, so same as water, here's a high-level look at capacity versus compliance for sewer. This was back May of 2020, so the last time we came and talked about budget. This is the slide that you saw. You can see we were deficient in all three areas for compliance with TCEQ for lift station, wastewater treatment, and wastewater pipelines. Go to the next slide. Here's a current look as of May of 2021. You can see we've made significant progress with bringing online Gruene water reclamation facility. We are now in compliance for wastewater treatment. Lift stations were inching closer, and wastewater pipelines, we've made progress with the North Kuehler Interceptor, and those lines will soon be reaching that TCEQ compliance bar. I can't wait for that presentation day that I can bring that to you, and we can all celebrate. Next slide. All right, so here's what the wastewater capital plan looks like. As you can see, a large portion of the plan is geared towards achieving regulatory compliance. But the same, some of it, or I'm sorry, the majority of it now is shifted to growth and development, with the minor part of it addressing outstanding regulatory compliance issues. And we also have some contractual obligations to design and install a sewer extension. That's why you see contractual obligation on there. That is to support the new Continental facility. That construction project is underway, and NBU will be reimbursed for that project by the 4B. Next slide. All right, so water supply, next slide. Here's a busy pie chart, but here's a look at our current water supply portfolio. On the pie, you can see that the hatched area within the pie are supplies that are undeliverable because we currently lack the infrastructure to treat, pump, and store that water. Some of the projects in our CIP will increase the amount of deliverable supply to better utilize our full water supply portfolio. And as you see there on the bottom of the screen, our maximum contracted supply as at the end of 2020, it hasn't changed since, is just over 50,000 acre feet per year. But our deliverable volume is only 23,000 acre feet per year. So we got quite a bit of headroom there in projects that we can build to utilize more of that supply. Next slide. All right, I really like this chart. Another busy chart, but it tells a good story. So the graph shows historical and forecasted demands in the light blue and dark blue bars, respectively. Our maximum contracted water supply is in the yellow bar there. And then the average year, or I'm sorry, the deliverable and the firm supply are in the orange lines and red lines, respectively. So like I said, only a portion of our supplies are deliverable. As you can see on this screen, the projects called out in the green banners represent new capacity, new treatment, or projects that are adding or increasing our utilization of our contracted water supplies, so that orange line is inching up towards that yellow line. So the completion of our 5-year plan and planned projects out in the future will allow us to deliver more of our contracted supplies and better utilize our very diverse water supply portfolio. Next slide. All right, so here's a look at our water supply costs. As you can see, the cost significantly increased over the 5-year period. This is largely due to the addition of the Mid-Basin project. As Ian said, though, our mixed portfolio is still one of the cheapest in the region. Next slide. And here's a comparison of water supply costs. So in the water resource plan, we evaluated many water supplies against 14 different criteria. And the ones that we did select to contract for are represented by some of these in the blue bars compared to the ones that we passed on in the green bar. So you can see the supplies that we have added to our portfolio and the supplies that we have in our portfolio are very attractively priced compared to some of the alternative supplies that we evaluated. Next slide. All right, so last section here, bear with me. Facilities. So as y'all all know, we are constructing a new headquarters facility at the end of West Point Drive. Here's a look at the forecasted sales revenue that we've worked into our financial operating plan. This extends through the FY 2031 time horizon. The agreement that we have with the city for the transfer of the service center, the cash flow for that agreement runs through that period. That's why the table extends that length of time. So as you can see here, we expect to realize a cash flow event for the sale of the downtown office in fiscal year 23. Right now we have in the plan just the appraised value of the building, the appraised value being the one that we conducted a couple of years ago. As y'all all know, the real estate market is a bit different than it was then, so that number may change. We expect it to change in NBU's benefit, but it's conservatively placed in there at $3.5 million. So a total there, proceeds totaling $13.6 million for the sale of both facilities. Next slide. All right, my last slide, and I'll be quiet, is the budget for our NBU headquarters. A couple of milestones here on the page. Design completion is expected to be in January 2022. We expect construction to be complete in the summer of 2023. Our budget for construction and design is $71 million. You net that with the proceeds of the sales, and you arrive at that $57 million number. Right now, we're forecasting a need of the design is developing to be about an 80,000 square foot office building, and then roughly 50,000 square feet of outbuildings and warehouse. And the site plan is here pictured on the slide. So with that, I believe we're moving on to technology, and I'm going to pass it off to Greg Brown in Robin Britton's absence to cover technology.
Good afternoon. So for technology, we're going to start with technology infrastructure, and what we're going to do is we're going to continue to build and expand on programs that work for the electric and wastewater resiliency, and adopt new programs, which we have in some pilot programs to meet and accommodate the growth that this region continues to see. From the operational technology, we are very excited about implementing a new SCADA replacement on the system that's well past due, and looking to enhance that across the board. Disaster Recovery Center is scheduled to be built and live next fall. I'm excited about that, and making it standardized with the headquarters in terms of system integration and equipment. For data strategy, everyone's excited about the data analytics team and the potential it has for dashboards and reporting. We just recently upgraded the server infrastructure to add more horsepower to the system for quicker processing in order to maximize all the full benefits of that particular system. I mean, you guys all know the data strategy group, the analytics is for predictive and the prescriptive analytic modeling. For information technology, right now we're working on is replacing the radio solution, and we adopted a new method where we're going to actually contract with Comal County and piggyback off their existing system, which is scheduled to go live this December. So we should be on those towers shortly thereafter. PCI review is currently, the contracting is in process right now, so providing evaluation of our payment credit card processing to ensure that we are in compliance and remediate those areas where we are not. We continue to standardize our PCs, phones, printers in order to maximize uptime and replacement of those individual systems. We are modernizing our cybersecurity system as well in order to harden our defenses. As you well know, utilities is a high target in the cyber security world, so we're continuing to make improvements on that front. And we are continuing to upgrade our systems. In the past, too much time had passed between system upgrades. So what we've spent the last 2 years is really upgrading every major enterprise system and put them on a patch and replacement schedule to ensure that they have the latest and greatest versions out there for maximum efficiency and functionality. Next slide, please. So this is stock photos, since this is going to be recorded and made for public consumption. Unfortunately, we have some really nice pictures that we can't show of cybersecurity without revealing our infrastructure. But what we're really excited about is the leaps and bounds we've made in terms of monitoring our systems, where we grew a footprint for monitoring. So now we monitor every production server, every PC, all the critical services. So if there's any signs of failure, we're automatically notified. And we can be more proactive in preventing downtime and outages. We also are in the process of implementing a new cybersecurity modern program called Splunk, and that adds a layer of artificial intelligence. Currently, there's no way we can monitor our entire infrastructure. So what the Splunk system does is every action on any computer or any server is written to a log file. So you have hundreds of thousands of log files with millions of actual occurrences. The software actually consumes all of these logs, and if anything that is suspicious is occurring, we get notified, because there's no way a human can digest all that information. So we're really excited about implementing this and continuing to implement the recommendations of the Department of Homeland Security, where we're adding more firewalls to our physical networks, and we're really hardening our system to make it really hard to breach. Next slide, please. And last, data analytics. Data analytics is, as you guys know, it's really a mesh of different databases, different systems to help with the predictive analysis of economic and power markets. And it would, let me see, I'm reading off here because this is not my specialty, so forgive me on this one. But the program, it is in production, and we have already made improvements to the system in order to maximize the benefit of that. And we are continuing to invest in the industry data sources to provide more detailed information. And that was all we had.
Great, well done. Thank you. Appreciate you stepping in for Robin today. All right, let me pick it up here at the summary for support. So if we go to the next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. So this is how it all lays out. We had one of these for each line of business. Here's the pie chart for support. Facilities, Ryan talked to you about the biggest portion of that, which is the office and the physical security systems that we have planned. Greg just went through information technology, and there are the numbers behind it. And then the headwaters, which we all know about and care about. In the 5-year plan, we have $14.7 million planned, and again, what you're seeing here is the next year budget. And the contributions over the 5 years are just a little over $10 million. I believe that's it for the support plan. Next slide, please. Okay, O&M. Earlier on in the presentation, just as a reminder, capital is 80% of the budget. So we just got through talking about 80% of the budget. Now we're going to get into 20%, and that's the O&M. So we have this slide broken down into personnel, which is the top, and then non-personnel just below that. So personnel, of course, as I mentioned, is one of the key takeaways, is one of the areas where we're strained, and we're continuing to add folks. So you can see the increase in personnel costs that are reflective of our continuing to add people to the organization. And then the non-personnel costs are across a variety of different reasons. One of them is the use of GASB, which we've shared with you each time we've used that, and it's allowed us to spread costs across future years instead of having it all in one year. We have some software as a service contracts in there for systems control, just following in line with what Greg was talking about earlier, just a lot of efficiencies and resiliency gains that we're getting through those types of changes. We have electric pole inspections in there to continue with our electric reliability. We have headwaters, capital campaign support, electric and water rate studies, staff augmentation in various areas. And so that's primarily what makes up that increase in non-personnel O&M. Next slide, please. Okay, and here are some, if you look at that O&M budget, here are some of the bigger, more significant initiatives that we have. Some are the same year to year, some are not. You can see tree trimming. It's one of the biggest reasons, I think. Well, there's a lot of reasons why our electric reliability is where it's at. What I meant to say is if you look at the reason for electric outages across all types of electric companies, this is one of the biggest causes, vegetation and things that come with it. So we're proud to keep that in there. Ryan mentioned the water resources plan. I mentioned the electric pole inspection and just a number of things I've already talked about here. And then there are some strategic initiatives. So some are compliant, some are strategic, and that's how they break down. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about capital, talked about O&M. Now we're going to get into the revenue requirements to fund this budget. Next slide. First thing we do before we look at revenues, we look for opportunities to cut costs. We put this slide in front of you every year, and we update it with new items that we've come up with. There are a total of $7 million worth of savings that we've identified. Next slide, please. After we look at cost cutting, we're always looking for new sources of revenue because the last place we want to look is rates. And you can see that in this plan, we have just over $16 million of new revenue sources. Next slide, please. And all of this, you know, we have the board financial policy, and that financial policy is geared towards achieving and maintaining a certain bond rating. We're not here to make money. We're not here to profit. There's no profit in our rates. It's about maintaining a certain bond rating because it directly impacts the customer's monthly bill. It impacts because of the cost of debt, and also because it makes us, our bond rating makes us a more qualified counterparty in the ERCOT market, which means less collateral has to be put out. It's very important. In order to achieve that bond rating, there are these ratios that you're all familiar with that we need to maintain. So after we look at all of this information I just shared, then we come up with the revenue requirements. At this point, I'll turn it over to Don for the next slide.
Thank you, Ian. You've seen this chart before. This Fitch peer comparison was prepared in June of 2020. So that was prior to the winter storm. Therefore, it doesn't include some of the changes that occurred in ratings due to the winter storm. This chart compares key ratios of public power entities. And if you look at the gold rows, you can see that NBU holds its ratios somewhat steadily throughout the 5-year plan and also increases its days cash on hand with the refill of the Power Stabilization Fund. Next slide, please. Okay, as Ian mentioned, our rates are driven by revenue requirements, and NBU is in the second year of a 3-year rate plan. Rates are the last place that we look for to get revenue, but we do need appropriate revenue to keep our ratios in line, and our ratios drive our bond rating. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a table of the revenue requirements we're looking at for throughout the 5-year plan. Because of what we're experiencing as far as growth in the economy in our area, we went with a full growth model. Full growth equals an average of 5.56% across all lines of business. Our assumptions included GLO development, as this was the most likely case. We saw a positive impact to our revenue requirements and our ratios over the 5-year plan as a result of layering in capital contributions and water supply fee from the developer. NBU is currently under a 3-year rate plan, which ends in fiscal year 23. We're projecting rate increases for fiscal year 24 through 26, but you can see that they start to taper off in fiscal year 25 and 26. Next slide, please. All right, now we'll talk a little bit about the rate plan we're under. So what this slide talks about the water rate plan, and you can see that we have a base rate increase of 8% in fiscal year 22 and 23, and also an increase in the water supply fee. Next slide, please. The water supply fee was removed from the first tier of water, which is for essential use. In the other tiers, it's set for $2.49 in fiscal year 22 and $2.79 in fiscal year 23. Next slide, please. In addition, we also implemented a low-income discount program and currently have over 50 customers enrolled in that program. The food bank qualifies the customers and sends a monthly list of participants that are enrolled for a year, and each year they have to requalify for the program. Next slide, please.
So
I'm going to turn it over.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, David.
In addition to the low discount program that Don was mentioning, we also created a number of tools to help empower our customers in order to give them control of their bills. This was in response to the rate increase that Ian proposed to City Council last year. The creation of these tools directly came from that. We created a number of tools, some of them where our customers can go directly to our website, such as our bill calculator, and they can forecast what their bill will be based off of forecasted usage. And it'll actually show them an exact duplicate of what that bill might look like. In addition to that, we've created many how-to videos showing, again, the concept behind this was to really give customers the knowledge they needed to take control of their bills. One of the big parts of this program was also creating proactive outreach letters that we sent to all of our customers, informing them of what their average water usage was last summer, and how the rate increases might impact them over the next 3 years. Thank you. Back to you, Don.
All right, now moving on to the sewer rate design. So our sewer rates for fiscal year 22 and 23 are set at 13%. And we've also updated our fees to customers that discharge high-strength wastewater into our system, and that costs NBU more to treat. Next slide, please. All right, the electric rate design. So our electric rate includes an increase to the distribution component of the rate in fiscal year 22 and 23. Depending on what the power cost recovery factor is set at, that increase is about a 1.2% impact in fiscal year 22 and a 2.4% impact in fiscal year 23 to the total bill. The distribution component is about 24% of the total bill and is the amount that NBU uses to operate and maintain its electric system. Next slide, please. Okay, Ian mentioned this earlier, but we are going to conduct an electric, water, and wastewater cost of service study this year. That will be in planning for our new rate structure for the future years in our plan. Next slide, please. One of the other things that we layered into this year's plan is we're putting an increase in our days cash on hand. We're increasing our power stabilization fund to 1 year of power cost, and we're moving our contingency fund from 90 days to 120 days of operating expenses. Both of these reserves are dynamic. Next slide, please. All right, so this is my final slide, and these are the results of our financial ratios. So as you know, the debt service coverage ratio is very important to the rating agencies. They want to make sure that we're generating enough cash to run our system and also make our debt payments. You can see we remain above the 2.4 coverage ratio that we have in our financial policy as a combined system. In fiscal year 23, when we pay off that taxable note, our debt service coverage dips to 1.54. We have an exception in our financial policy to allow this due to that winter storm extraordinary event. On the debt to cap, NBU remains below the 50% threshold, with fiscal year 23 and 24 having the highest percentage due to that debt we are issuing to construct our capital. And then our days cash on hand is above what we currently have in the policy of 140 days, and it builds as we fill that power stabilization fund. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, who's very instrumental in putting this plan together, and she's going to talk about a few slides.
Hello. All right, so this slide takes a look at our capital funding by source. NBU uses all the available sources before we issue debt to fund the remainder of the capital. 63% of the capital will be funded with new debt, 12% will come from revenue, 8% will come from those GLO contributions, 3% from other contributions and grants, and 14% come from impact fees. Next slide, please. All right, NBU is planning on issuing a total of $452.1 million in debt over the 5-year plan. Debt requirements do start to fall off in the out years. We just have to get through the hump of those first 3 years to get the capacity that we will need. And also new debt, any new debt that we issue will stay on the books for about 30 years. Next slide, please. When taking a look at our debt service, our total 5-year debt service comes in at $201.3 million. And you'll see in FY23, we have our debt service plus the $50 million for the short-term liquidity note payoff. Next slide. All right, impact fees are used to help pay for the cost of new construction for new growth. We have impact fee statutes that we're required to follow with procedures in place for implementing these local impact fee programs. Only projects listed in the CIP at the time of the development of the impact fee can be included in the calculation. Market conditions and CIP can change very quickly. Impact fees do need to be updated on a timely basis, or we will not be able to offset new demands made by growth. With that being said, NBU does plan to go through an impact fee study in fiscal year 2022. All right, I'll turn it back over.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Appreciate it. Okay, this is a new slide that we have this year. You're used to us comparing our bills to other utilities. Well, in this slide, and we're usually among the lowest, in some cases the lowest. This is impact fees, and it's flipped. So the orange bars are the different NBU impact fee schedules. The most current one at the very bottom is the 2018 plan that we're under right now, and you can see we're second highest. And the reason I put this in here is not because I'm proud of it. I'm not. The reason I put this in here is because what we're trying to communicate is that we are doing everything we can to allocate the cost of development on those developers who are building. And so that's what we've done here. You can see that we had an impact fee update way back in 2011. And then we did the next one in 2016. So it was 5 years later, but we saw the growth continuing at a rate that was that many of us didn't expect. So in 2018, we did it all over again. And you've heard previously, we're about to do it again. And some of the feedback we've gotten from the Impact Fee Advisory Committee over the last 4 years is we recognize there's growth. We recognize that things need to be built, but don't surprise us. Come to us when things change and just be transparent. That's exactly what we're doing. So we're going to go forward with another impact fee update. Next slide, please. Now we're going to get into to bill comparisons, and we're going to start with the electric bill. This is average residential, which is 1,200 kilowatt hours. You can see that we are now above average by a few dollars, and that's going into the winter storm. We were the lowest bill out of all of these, and because we've adjusted our cost recovery factor, it's got us where we are now. There are a couple of utilities on here that I'm aware of that will be increasing theirs as well. So that's where we are with electric. Next, please. Okay, water. This is essential use volume. So this is folks that are not irrigated. Yeah, go ahead.
On the last chart, you said that you're aware of some of these who have wound in their freeze cost adjustments, but are essentially most of these before they make any adjustments. I assume they have to make similar adjustments to us.
As from what I know, what you're seeing here do not include adjustments based on the winter storm, or the ones that we went in and did it the week of the storm because we saw what was coming. The other thing that we're doing is go ahead, Dawn.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say the only one that has made an adjustment on here is GVEC. So they had a rate increase that just went into place, and that was to start collecting back for the winter storm. We do know that CPS Energy will be raising their rates in fall to start collecting back for the winter storm. And there's a couple others on here that probably will have an increase. They just have not implemented it yet.
I mean, I assume that all of these companies had the significantly higher costs, and they had to do something with them unless they decide not to pay them.
Well, some of them own generation, and this was it was hit or miss as far as who won and who lost in this winter storm. Some folks who own generation were in the hole by billions of dollars. Some who own generation, for whatever reason, it was their hedging program for gas or whatever it was, they ended up coming out in the black, and they made money on this. So some of these utilities
made money, and they won't see a rate increase. But as Don pointed out, Don, thank you for the update. I appreciate that. I would say that, well, I don't want to speculate on where everybody is, but some have increased, and we're aware that others on this list likely will too. Okay, next slide, please. This is essential use water. This is non-irrigation. This is important because once you get beyond essential use, it's discretionary. And you can see we have the lowest water bill for essential use in the entire region among all these purveyors. And again, I always like to point out, as we're going to go up two volume levels on water for the next two slides. What I want you to do is watch Austin, excuse me, and San Antonio, because they've seen this movie and they know how it ends, meaning they've gone down this path of growth and extraordinary expanse of infrastructure and water supply, and their rate designs reflect that. So keep an eye on Austin and San Antonio as we go on. Next slide, please. This is 25,000 gallons. I can't remember the exact percentage. David, is it 80% of customers use this amount or less? I'm bad at quoting numbers.
I believe 85.
Thank you. Thank you. So 85% of our customers use this amount or less. And if you look at the bottom of the chart, you can see that Austin goes all the way up to the highest bill at 25,000 gallons. San Antonio is the third highest. And so their rate design reflects the types of things that we're going through, which is the investments, and they recognize that it's irrigation that's driving the need for those types of things. And that's how they set the rate for irrigation. You can see that we are very, very low, even at 25,000 gallons. Next slide, please.
Hey, Ian, one more question. Sorry to ask all these questions.
Great questions.
But on the last chart, under 25,000 gallons, you said it was 80 or 85%. What is it under our typical, what is it, 7,500 gallon a month kind of rate? What percentage of our customers fall? You know, whether it's 7,500 or 10,000, I'm just curious.
So for our customers who use essential use customers who use less than 7,000 gallons a month, 65% of our customers use less than 7,000 gallons per month. And so 65%.
Okay, thank you.
Good point. You know, we may, when we go to council, we may put that percentage on these slides because it's relevant. It's a good point. Okay, we're jumping up to 50,000 gallons here. You can see just how much higher Austin and San Antonio are. Again, they recognize that it's irrigation that's driving these investments, and you can see MBU still below average on these bills. So I recognize that water bills are going up, but it's an incredible value that people are getting in New Braunfels right now based on their water bill. Next slide, please. I think this is important because this shows, we have this for water, we also have this for wastewater here in just a minute. It shows that what MBU is facing in the way of water and wastewater investments is what everybody's facing in our region. This is showing rate increases for us and some select utilities within the corridor. And if you look all the way over at the right, the very far right column, these are sorted low to high by bill. So MBU, as I showed earlier, has the lowest, and this is essential use, 6,000 gallons. We have the lowest bill, and we have a 9.5% increase on that essential use. You can see how we compared it to some of the others. Next slide, please. Switching over to wastewater. This is average wastewater use for residential. And I saw when the team put this together this year, I looked at that slide and thought that's not what it looked like last year. And so you can see where we are on this, just a bit above average. If you go to the next slide, you'll see why it changed. Again, these other utilities are facing the same investment requirements that we are. This is also sorted by lowest to highest. We're the second lowest for average residential. And you can see that we had the highest percent change over the course of those years. So we're doing some catch up right now. As y'all know, I mean, Ryan showed you the compliance charts and where we are, we're getting caught up. But even with all of that catch up, we're still second lowest for wastewater. Next, please. Okay, this is my last slide before I turn it over. This puts all three lines of service on one bill. And the important assumptions here are its average volume for average residential electric volume, its average wastewater volume, and its essential use water. And if you look at that, if you put them all three together, whether it's off peak or on peak, we have the lowest bill on the corridor. And that's something that doesn't just happen. It's been decades of good management. And if you look at the amount of capital investments we have and we're still the lowest bill, it's absolutely remarkable and something that I hope you all are proud of. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly.
Okay, I'm going to take us to the end. So this is our 20-year forecast. Just like we build a 5-year plan, NBU also prepares a 20-year forecast. This is a tool to help us with our decision making. It gets a little rough in the outer years since there's so many unknowns. However, the first 3 years outside of that 5-year plan give you an indicator of what is upcoming. When looking at the 20-year capital program, you can see that the first to 7 years are our largest. That's when we're building the capacity needed. And then it begins to level off in those outer years. And we did build in an inflation rate of about 2.2%. Next slide, please. This slide shows our debt service coverage over those 20 years. And as you can see, in that fiscal year 23 is when we dip down to pay off that $50 million in liquidity. We still do meet our bond test for that year of 1.4 coverage. And then we do see that we start to recover as we pay off and we have less need for debt. Okay, next slide, please. Our debt to cap also recovers as we have less need for debt. This shows we're paying back large amounts of that debt in the first portions of that 20-year plan when we have the highest need for capital. Okay, next slide. And then this slide just looks over those 20 years with our revenue requirements. Even though we have show some rate increases in the middle years, they're much more modest and they start to decline in the last 10 years. Okay, next slide.
Can I say something real quick? Oh, there we go. All right, thanks, Kimberly. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting. I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay.
Okay, can we go back one slide, please? Thank you. Well, when I kick this thing off, I think the fifth takeaway I had was about rates. And one of the things that I wanted to get out of this financial operating plan, this budget and FOP this year, is what does the long-term revenue requirement look like? And what does that mean for future rate plans that we need to pursue through City Council? As Don pointed out earlier, fiscal years 22 and 23 are part of the 3-year rate plan that's already been approved by City Council. So the next rate plan will pick up in fiscal year 2024. And you can still see that year we have a bit of a heavy lift in water and wastewater, but it tapers off over the next 2 years. So really the big increases only go out for 3 more years after our current plan is over. And then you can see these little 1% and 2% here and there. Those are the kinds of things where we don't have to go for a 1% rate increase every year. If it's a nominal increase on a bill, we can go for 2 or 3% in 1 year and it takes care of those requirements. My point is I want to get to, I'm interested in that point at which we're not having to talk about rate increases every year. And I'm very encouraged by what this shows. As we've been talking about, once we get back into compliance on our systems, and then once we build out those additional projects to make sure we stay in compliance, that's when you start seeing these things taper off. And once we get past, 2026, we're all going to sit around and tell stories about way back when we had to build all this stuff. But we'll be in a really good spot by then. So anyway, this is one of my favorite slides out of this whole presentation because it shows what the road looks like ahead. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kimberly. I'll turn it back over to you.
That's okay, and that's all I had. I think that was the end of the presentation.
All right, well, I appreciate it. Well, at this point, I'll turn it over to the board and ask if you all have any questions or if you want us to go back to any slides or anything that you'd like to talk about.
Does anybody have any questions that hadn't been asked?
I'm not sure how to do this, but no, I appreciate this. It's a lot of good work. But as I went through the book, the little binder that we got with all kinds of charts and graphs in it, I've got a number of questions, but I don't want to go through them here because I'm sure a lot of my questions are questions that some of the others already know the answer to. Is there a way, Ian or Laura, that at some point I can sit down with somebody and go through the questions I have in this booklet?
Yeah, you bet. We can, absolutely. We can do it now. We'll set something up with you. As soon as this meeting's over, we'll get it on the calendar so we can get all those answered.
Thank you.
You bet.
Anyone else? We got everybody still on the line?
Everybody's
Hey,
here.
John. Hey, John
Everybody's
Popper.
up.
I want to say thank you to Don and Ryan. Very good presentations, Greg, and Kimberly and David as well. And it's obviously a ton of work and kind of modifying and updating what we do each year, but it's essential. And kind of seeing where we go, and we're all in a massive capitalization and expense phase right now. So it's good to see that not the end is near, but some of these capital campaigns will taper off, and hopefully we'll have some rate stabilization as well. So I think today really demonstrates where we're headed.
No, it is a lot of work, and of course, Judy and I have the luxury of already seeing it, but it does take so much work, I'm sure, on everybody that's been involved, because it doesn't, the forecasting and so forth, as important as it is, we try to get it right. I know the staff has worked their tails off to get these numbers and presentations put together, so it is sincerely appreciated.
And there's so much work going on, and lots of challenges and a lot of cost, with 80% being capital. But through it all, as I sit and listen to the presentation and think as a whole, Ian and staff and everyone, we have a very good story to tell. And I know you guys get out there and tell that story on a regular basis. And so even with the challenges and the hard years to come, our story remains one of the best in the area. So thank you for all the work.
Okay, anything else on the presentation from anyone?
That's all we have. I just want to say thanks. I appreciate all your great feedback very much. It means a lot to us. And what we'll do is we'll wrap this all up. I'm not hearing any changes. We'll meet with you, Mr. Peters, and see if you have anything that you like looks out of line and something we want to consider changing. And if any changes happen, we'll put all that together and we'll bring it to the regular board meeting at the end of this month. If there are no changes, then it'll be exactly what you saw today. So thank you.
Okay, thank you all again. Okay, that takes us to executive session. The Board of Trustees may recess in executive session for any purpose permitted by the Texas Open Meetings Act, including but not limited to, number one, consultation with the attorney regarding pending and contemplated litigation and other matters protected by attorney-client privilege, section 551.071 Texas Government Code. A, discuss the utility construction cost sharing agreement for the Copper Ridge subdivision and related amendments and modifications, all among NBU, Sutherland Communities, NB Land Properties Limited, and Sutherland Copper Ridge LLC. The Board of Trustees, upon reconvening in open session, will discuss, consider any action, if necessary, regarding closed session items. I have got 2:34. Why don't we jump off here? Y'all want to get back on here in 10 minutes. How about 2:45? Does that suit everybody? Is that good? Okay, we'll jump back on executive session then at 2:45. Okay, I've got 3:08. We are back in open session. Do we have any more business to come before the board? Not hearing any, we stand adjourned. Thank y'all.